Hello again, everyone, and welcome again to our Sea Otter exhibit. If you're just joining us, you are here at a great time. You can see we've just been joined by some of my friends from the Otter Care team as they get started with our feeding and training session. So each of these sessions will start in the same way that we see here, with something we call stationing. Our otters position themselves at a designated spot on the deck, joined by the trainer that they're working with. Today on exhibit, we have 3 of our 5 resident otters. We have Rosa, Selka, and Ruby. Let me go ahead and introduce who exactly is who and give you some tips on being able to tell apart our girls on exhibit today. So as I mentioned, we have our friend Rosa. She is our blondest otter on exhibit today on the far right-hand side. In the middle, she's joined by her friend Selka, one of our more chocolatey brunette otters. And on the left-hand side, kind of closer to the windows now, is our friend Ruby. She is our youngest otter on exhibit today, but a fellow brunette like her friend Selka. As I mentioned, we have 5 resident otters here, all of whom have been deemed non-releasable by the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, and that's for different medical or behavioral reasons. But today we're getting an inside look at some of the routine care our otters get here at the aquarium. This training and feeding session will be feeding our otters using a method called positive reinforcement. Those of you at home with animals might be familiar with this technique. Our trainers are going to be talking to our otters, guiding them with verbal and physical guides, such as those buoys you see on their hips. These targets and the verbal commands they're going to be using to guide our otters to asking them to do different behaviors. If our otter does the correct behavior, they're going to be rewarded or positively reinforced with their favorite tasty foods. Naturally, you might wonder, what happens if our otter does a different behavior? Well, no worries, folks. We like to focus on the positive side of positive reinforcement, and our trainers can simply shift gears, asking our girls to do a different behavior that they might be more comfortable with. This is all for the sake of ensuring that our otters are comfortable and safe with their caretakers, as these are wild animals. Coming back to what we're seeing here on exhibit, we're good to see our trainers practicing different types of behaviors with our girls, ranging from what we'd call more husbandry or animal care, or to something we'd call enrichment, keeping our girls mentally and physically engaged here on exhibit. So we're seeing a range of different behaviors here today. For example, our friend on the left there who was just asked to swim in and out of that otter spa pool. This is an example of one of those enrichment behaviors, asking her to engage with her exhibit in new and challenging ways, but also focusing on her trainer and what they're asking her to do. As you can see, each of our otters is specifically trained up or paired up with one trainer. Focusing on their trainer and the next action that they're asking them to do keeps these otters mentally focused. For us, that enrichment could be something like reading a book or maybe even going for a walk. But for our otters, it's some of these behaviors we're seeing right here on exhibit. You see a few different enrichment items in the exhibit. For example, that car wash kelp on the left-hand side. This enrichment can also help engage our otters' natural behaviors they'd use to survive out in the wild. Interacting with this car wash kelp gives them the same experience they would interacting with kelp in their kelp forest habitats. Now you might be wondering why there's no real kelp here in the exhibit, and that's for a good reason. But I'll get into that a little bit more later. On the menu today for our girls is a yummy 3-course meal of shrimp, squid, and clam. In the wild, otters eat invertebrates. These are animals who don't have a backbone, who typically have a hard shell to protect themselves. So on exhibit today, our otters are getting the softer and squishier parts of their food. You might have noticed that the clam they're being fed is missing that hard shell that I just mentioned. Otters are tool users. In the wild, they can use tools like their hard jaws, strong teeth, or an item like a rock or the piling of a deck to help crack open their hard-shelled foods. As I mentioned on exhibit, like you see them today, they don't get those shells, and that's for a good reason. Now, these otters are wild animals, as I mentioned earlier, and they found that their favorite thing to use to practice those tool-using skills on exhibit when we originally fed them their hard-shelled animals was actually those windows you're all looking through. That's right, folks. Our otters decided to bring their hard-shelled animals like crabs and urchins up to the windows to try to crack them open, quickly getting them pretty scratched up. So we've learned to let them enjoy those animals behind the scenes where there's no acrylic windows to worry about. And on exhibit like today, they get different enrichment items to help mimic some of those foods. You might see a few different toys in the exhibits. These toys can be stuffed with the otter's foods, challenging them to retrieve the goodies inside. Just in the same way they would with their hard-shelled foods, the otters can also practice those natural tool-using skills, taking these toys up to the deck, or my favorite, watching them bring them over to the windows and getting to practice cracking them open. So keep your eye out today. You might see our otters bring in some of their favorite toys over to the windows, and that's right, banging them against the glass. But that's them practicing those wild skills in action. We get to see them challenging themselves to retrieve the goodies from inside. I did mention that we also see different animal care behaviors that our trainers will practice with our otters, again, to ensure that these wild animals are comfortable and safe with their caretakers. Some examples of those. Earlier, we saw that Selka was asked to climb up onto that deck and even up onto the rock behind the otter spa. This gives our trainers a chance to see our otters' agility both inside and out of the water. As I mentioned, they might also guide our otters with those targets, the buoys on their hips. The otters could also be asked to touch their nose to that buoy or perhaps even their paw. If they're asked to climb up onto the deck, something we call decking out, they could also be asked to climb up onto their hind legs and then even give that buoy a high five. While it's adorable to see our otters do these behaviors, they all serve a good reason. This gives our trainers a chance to get a closer inspection of our otters, getting a closer look at their fur, face, paw, and teeth. Getting a nice inspection of these otters is important to monitoring their health, and especially to making sure that they're maintaining some of those wild skills, as I mentioned. On exhibit like we see them today, our otters act as ambassadors for their species, teaching us all it means to be an otter and how to better protect these endangered species. Behind the scenes, our otters have another very important job. Here at the aquarium, we have a one-of-a-kind sea otter surrogacy program, where wild pups who have been stranded and rescued can be paired up with our otters here on exhibit. Behind the scenes, these otters can teach them all the skills they need to survive in the wild, some of the same ones you see them practicing here today with their enrichment. Then these pups can be released back out into the wild, an incredible example of how our otters have a direct contribution to the recovery of their species. And folks, just by you being here, your admission at the aquarium today also supports the amazing work done here at the aquarium and with our otters. Speaking of which, Rosa here, who we have on exhibit, she's now retired from that surrogacy program, but during her time as a foster mom, she raised over 15 pups all on her own. Bravo, Rosa. Now I invite you to swing by and check out our auditorium program, Luna, a Sea Otter Story, if you'd like to learn more about that surrogacy program. But it does look like we've wrapped up with the feeding for today. I invite you to come and find me. Again, my name is Anevay up on the second floor. Please feel free to come share any more of those otter curiosities you might have, or if you've learned some new adaptations that our otters have living in those cold waters, or just any otter questions. Please feel free to come and find me up on the second floor. But if you're continuing on your adventure for today, thank you so much for joining us, and hope you all have an utterly fantastic day here at the Monterey Bay Aquarium.